Let's start off with Todd. Now, Todd McFarlane is a Canadian-inspired baseball player who got his passion from his father, who was this great man. He provided for his family, and Todd McFarlane wanted to be just like him. But unfortunately, he was consistently walked on by the big faceless company man with a cigar. And Todd saw this, and that made him angry, and so he would use his anger for baseball. But where's the comic book crap? I hear you ask. Well, fun fact, he didn't actually get into comic books until he was 16. Yeah, it's strange, but Todd McFarlane didn't actually want to work for comics. He just wanted to be a baseball player who just so happened to like and draw comic books. But why? He believed that people in comic book industries were these rich, powerful New Yorkers. But that own changed when channel surfing one night, he saw a clip of John Byrne's X-Men. Seeing this, and after a baseball accident, he decided to go all in with comic books with the help of his lovely girlfriend, Wanda. And he got to work on comic books. Yes, his beginning art was, well... But he got better and better. And that was when he applied for as an artist on Marvel Comics. And he waited and waited and waited for a letter to arrive. And that letter would change his life. He opened the letter, and it was a rejection. But Todd McFarlane didn't care. With the help of his girlfriend, he still started sending comic book art to comic book companies. And he got rejected 350 times. But one day, when he was walking to his caravan, his soon-to-be wife Wanda asked him one simple question. Who is Steve Englehart? He's a comic book artist, said Todd. Well, he just called and wants to give you a job on Coyote. Finally. After over 300 no's, he got a yes. And he was the lead. Oh, no, wait. Coyote got cancelled after 4 issues, leaving Todd McFarlane out of a job. But Todd didn't care, and so still continued to draw, until this one health nut named Don Newton heard that unpasteurized milk was good for you. But who is John Newton? Oh, nothing. He was just the main artist for Infinity Inc. And the people hearing this was, well, scrapping to find a new artist. Someone spotted drawing by Todd McFarlane. Todd had finally gotten another job in comics. And this is where he used his graphic design skills, and you can tell. He got a job on The Incredible Hulk. Sure, a lot of us now draw Hulk as this big monster, but I think a couple of decades ago, Hulk before Todd McFarlane's influence was just this strong, handsome dude, and now was way more Frankenstein's monster. The way he drew him broke the mold, and the Incredible Hulk started selling hotcakes. Todd McFarlane made the best comic book cover of all time, and with the help of Hulk's writer, Peter David, he even got a Wolverine, which yes doesn't sound impressive, but remember, then, Marvel's cash cow was Wolverine, not really Spider-Man. And if Marvel just let people who wanted to draw Wolverine in their comics, well, every single comic would just have Wolverine, and that's just an awful idea. Isn't that right for 2000s? And thanks to his impressive work on the Hulk, not only with his pencils, but also with his inks, and since Todd McFarlane was a word addict, he would randomly just pop into Marvel's editor desk and ask, hey, do you know any more work I could do? And one day, some guy said, yeah, sure, I've got Spider-Man, you could do something with him. Now he became the main artist on Spider-Man. And he goes all in. Spider-Man gets a redesign with more bug-like features opposed to just the man-like features of previous artists, e.g. Jack Kirby. He created Venom, one of Spider-Man's most popular characters of all time. But what Todd was doing was kind of a big no when it came from Marvel, because back then it was just, hey, kid, draw Spider-Man just like this artist did and do nothing else. So a lot of editors told Todd, hey, stop doing that. But Todd just said no. And he continued with his work, but I'm sure that won't come back later, right? But his work on Spider-Man ended up inspiring people. You know, people like Rob Liefeld. Rob Liefeld was this happy-go-lucky Californian kid who had a fairly hard childhood. His dad was very sick, and expensive hospital trips were just the norm for poor old Rob. In the waiting room, what was there? It was a comic. And those comics made Rob Liefeld realize what he was going to do when he was older. But just one small issue. Free time for poor old Rob is more of a privilege for Rob than any good amount of money, which he still doesn't have. Rob worked 2 jobs for his family to support them. And comic books were his only form of escapism. He practiced strong with them all the little spare time he had. And he'd do this until one fateful day at Comic-Con, when editor Mark Gruenwald was looking at kids' art, because most Comic-Cons and an editor would usually find artists. And when the 19-year-old Rob Liefeld, with everything to lose and everything to gain from his portfolio with his sick dad once again being sick, and with the amount of work he had just due to ask them out, joining Marvel-wise, he walked up to Mark and he showed him his portfolio. Mark looked at his art for a while, and Mark said these words that would change Rob's life. Congratulations, kid, you're hired. Rob's dream had become a reality. Rob's first work was on Hawk and Dove, but despite no one caring, let alone knowing Hawk and Dove, his visual design and style brought him into the mainstream, and you could definitely see the inspiration in his art. Him and Todd had very similar art, and one Comic-Con where he got his job, or was now the one where he was giving jobs to other artists just like him. And at that Comic-Con, he meets a certain mulleted guy with a jacket. That guy was Todd McFarlane. And at that certain Comic-Con, not only did a bunch of inspiring comic book fans get a job, but Rob McFarlane got a lifelong best friend. They became inseparable. They were like Orion Pax and D16, or Batman and Robin. They had an inseparable brother-like bond. Everywhere one goes, the other would follow, which led them to start their own certain comic book company. Indie comics are great. Not only are they a fun read, but making them has a lot more benefits than regular comics. Like how in most comics, when you create a character, you don't own them. The comic book companies own them. But in indie comics, now you own them. It also breeds a lot more creativity and going all out on your comic books. You're not told not to do this by this fascist editor. And Todd McFarlane in this, you got an idea. Now, Todd working on his comic books was kind of having his joy drained out of him like a wet sock. And the comic editors were telling him to change this and not to do that, whilst they were getting rich off his work, and he had yet to got so much as a thumbs up. And that was what made Todd McFarlane snap. He had realized he was becoming just like his dad, including being controlled by these greedy puppeteers. So he gave those editors just 2 words. I quit. Todd McFarlane started a team, and the first one to be on that list was obviously Rob Liefeld. how after creating characters such as Deadpool, Cable, Domino, and 700 others, he heard Todd McFarlane's plan and he said, yeah. And now they were getting other great comic book artists to join them for their cause. People like Jim Lee, who, fun fact, Todd McFarlane made an auction, and he also created Batman Hush and the best sold comic book of all time. Erik Larsen, the wise old man of Image, fun fact, also inspired Robert Kirkman. Mark Silvestri, the man with anime protagonist levels of persistence. And Jim Valentino, someone with some of the greatest advice. You can even ask this guy. And with their efforts to choose to quit for Marvel, heck, some of them went on the telephone and said, I will never work with you. To DC, a company which like 2 people worked for then. But Todd McFarlane had a goal, which was to hurt Marvel as much as humanly possible, and so far, his plan was doing greatly. This was the moment where Image Comics spawned, and they were going to do things that Marvel should have done. Like with most comic books, you have to sign this work for hire contract, which basically states, screw you, the character you made is ours now. But with Image Comics, you could create a character, and the character you made, you now own. And characters they made characters such as Savage Dragon, made by Erik Larsen. It was a comic about this alien creature who tried to conquer Earth, but after getting knocked out, changes into a police officer and becomes an officer of justice. And fun fact, was created in 1993, and still to this day is being published, making it the longest running one-man comic book series. But if you want to talk about the longest running indie comic series, well, wait no longer, because there's this little thing called Spawn. Spawn was created by Todd McFarlane, and Spawn is about this creature from hell. The story is all about Al Simmons, a war veteran who, after he died, went to hell. He made a deal with Malebolgia, aka Satan, but not really, because Satan is a character, so yeah, it's confusing. And with this deal to see his wife Wanda, named after Todd's wife. Yeah, it's something Todd does, it's not important. But ends up seeing his wife 5 years later, when she already married to someone else. Yep, you saw your wife, back to hell. But instead of becoming a slave to Satan, he decided to become an anti-hero, set out on helping the people. And Spawn was basically the printer of money for Image. And it even helped revolutionize the toy industry, because before then, instead of these cool, awesome toys that cost kidneys, there were these cheap, lame paper cutouts which still cost kidneys. And all thanks to Todd McFarlane. Now we get on to Rob Liefeld. Rob Liefeld's comic was Youngblood, which, if I could describe Spawn as the Spider-Man of Image, Youngblood would be the Avengers of Image. This was the most 90s thing to ever 90s. Youngblood is about this ragtime group of superheroes. Instead of being treated like heroes, they're treated like celebrities. So, the boys before the boys. And Rob Liefeld knows he has a hit on his hands. His most sold comic book was X-Force #1, which sold over 5 million copies. And for Youngblood to make the same amount of money as X-Force did back in the day. But Youngblood doesn't make the same amount of money X-Force does. It makes 5 times that. And Image becomes a success. Cartoons, toys, merchandise, where all the real money is made. And so Todd McFarlane's plan is a success. But there were some issues, like how horrible the shipping was. Spawn came out on a regular basis, and so did Savage Dragon. But Youngblood did not. The shipping was so bad, the companies that shipped out those comics had to change their rules. Whoa, you've got to screw up bad if the shipping companies have to change their policies all because of you. And Rob opened another comic book company, but that's just for making other comics outside of the Image universe. Well, at least that's just what Rob Liefeld said. But that's a different can of worms for a different time. General reactions from the audience were great. A lot of teens ate it up, and that made him filthy rich. Todd even got baseball from the MLB, and it only cost him $3.2 million. But there was one small issue. These guys were comic book artists, not writers. So Todd McFarlane got this great idea. Alan Moore, the creator of Watchmen, the most beloved comic book where these heroes are just more realistic, basically just like The Boys. Frank Miller, who created The Dark Knight Returns, which only inspired like every single Batman piece of media after The Dark Knight. Let's talk about Neil Gaiman. This classy guy, he's very polite, and Neil Gaiman and Todd became friends. Wait. Friend? Oh yeah. How is his relationship with Rob going? Well, that, like, little brother and older brother relationship had kinda changed with their success. Todd continues to get better and better. Rob just leans hard into his layout structure while, yes, it's different, it's just too much. And they had two very different reactions to success. While Todd just wants to be with his family, Rob is hungry for success. And he wants to keep on pushing. And Rob eventually grows his own empire that makes characters just as quick as him and hires the best of the best. Todd McFarlane has his family, and just has Spawn to think about when it comes to comics. Yes, Spawn is just a bigger hit than Youngblood, and before, yes, Rob had admiration for Todd, but admiration slowly became jealousy. Indie comics are great, but there's a problem with it. What do you think would sell more? A mediocre Tech Jack comic or a terrible Spider-Man comic? Normally that, but it also has seen in a lesser light than normal comics. It's seen as less impressive than working at Marvel. Oh, it's more impressive work at Marvel than its Dark Horse, and legal issues, as we'll soon hear, are just awful. Let's start off light. In the 90s, there was a Spawn movie which did pretty good for box office, but Spawn's rise was awful, getting itself a 70% on Rotten Tomatoes. And speaking of Spawn, let's talk about lawsuits. Todd's thing about naming characters, well, one late night, a mother was watching the Spawn cartoon, and she cried. She was so sad she called her son. She saw her son twist into this gross mob boss. She asked him, why would you do such a horrible thing? And that son's name was Tony Twist. Todd made his mother cry, so he was gonna make Todd cry. And so he sued Todd McFarlane for $15 million. But hey, that's just long lawsuit, right? Wrong, because his once close friend Neil Gaiman was kind of getting frustrated with Todd's methods. Todd is very anti-contract. That was actually how he got the 4 writers, but Neil Gaiman was just getting frustrated. Yes, Todd still paid him with love letters, but what if Todd was going to die? Does that mean they'll just cut him out? Why would they pay for a man if they're not even legally obliged to? So Neil walked up to Todd McFarlane and asked, hey, could I just get a normal contract instead? Todd refused him and gave him an ultimatum. Either he still gets paid with 1 love letters or gets 1 huge payday, and he gets never paid again. But Neil just wanted a contract, and so would lead to a lawsuit. Not only for the contract, but for 3 characters Neil Gaiman created: Medieval Spawn, Cagliostro, and Angela. Todd had even planned in advance with these rip-offs of these characters. So Neil waited to hurt Todd. Who did he get to fund his case? None other than Marvel Comics. And everyone wanted to hurt Todd. John Burns, the man who made Todd McFarlane the man he is today, is bashing Todd. And that's not all. The writer on his Hulk work, who once worked with Todd and fought with Todd, now became someone who supported Neil. And Todd got sued for his characters, and while Medieval Spawn and Cagliostro, Todd still kept the rights to. That was not the case for Angela, who was Neil's property, and now he wanted to hurt Todd as much as he can, so he sold Angela to Marvel. But don't forget about Tony, because he won that case. He got a nice little payday out of that, but that destroyed Tom McFarlane, and later on he had to file for Chapter 11 bankruptcy. Chapter 11 bankruptcy is like normal bankruptcy, but you still gotta run your company. Todd didn't just lose his money, but he also lost 2 of his closest friends. But at least Todd McFarlane still has his company. This cannot be said about his once closest friend. People who have worked in Image have still worked for other companies, like Jim Lee left Image because of a declined sales in the comic book industry, especially in the US, and so left Image Comics and got a job at DC. And now Jim is doing great. I mean, now he's the head creative officer at DC. He only left because of a decline in sales and his family. But Rob, on the other hand, didn't have these motives. Rob just wanted to hurt Tom McFarlane, just like how he hurt Marvel. Rob has been plotting to quit for some time, like with his other comic company. He wanted to get rid of him for a while, but later on, one night, he got a message from Marvel with a sweet little paycheck on it. And Todd obviously said no, and so did nearly all of the staff, except for one person. Rob Liefeld. Rob took the deal and he left Image Comics. And that was when the relationship ended with Todd. They are now like Optimus Prime and Megatron, or Batman and Red Hood. Todd himself made a statement on Rob, and Todd called him delusional for above a joke. He didn't pay his artist, and this one quote that destroyed Rob and everything he's worked for. Everything you know about Rob is in his name. He robs, he lies, and he failed. And Todd wasn't the only person to talk ill about Rob. Everyone knows about the bad art as he would do on Captain America. His run would go horribly. It was panned by everyone. He created this Captain America image. I don't even need to say anything. Rob Liefeld became the face of awful comics. The horrible anatomy, the I'm so deep writing. I mean, has this guy even seen a woman before? Jokes and memes started coming out of this guy. And Image was getting seen as a lesser comic book company. And Image Comics was how all of us would see atrocious anime fanfiction. No one was reading comic books as a whole. But how come the story's not over? Look at all the bad things that's happened to Image Comics. That would destroy any other company. We have seen that they don't take no for an answer. And this is where they work attitude saving Image. But it wasn't Todd McFarlane or any artist, it was Robert Kirkman. Robert Kirkman was the man who saved Image Comics. But who is Robert Kirkman? Well, let's take it back a few years. Two kids were in a boring classroom. One of these kids was drawing a picture of Spider-Man. And that one kid who was drawing Spider-Man looked over at another kid. He was drawing an X-Man. And they both admired each other's drawings. And those kids were Robert Kirkman and Cory Walker. And that was the moment where they knew what they were going to be in the future. Robert and Cory would work in the comic book industry, but not Marvel or DC. Once in a comic book store, Robert saw a poster for Youngblood. "What is this?" said by Robert. "This is Youngblood from Image Comics," said the comic book guy. "What is Image Comics?" said Robert. "This indie comic book company with all these cool people in it like Erik Larsen," the comic book guy said. And that was the moment they knew Image Comics was right for them. Wouldn't you know, later on in life, they got to working in comics at a retail store. Yeah, he wasn't doing too well. He was in a lot of debt and had to open up multiple bank accounts. But Cory was doing very well. He was actually in art school. But Robert remembers, "Hey, I want to do comic books." So he calls up his friend Roy Walker, and they work on their comic books. But this is the 2000s, the edgy stage of everything. It was dark, it was edgy, and this was just the case for comic books. So they make Battle Pulp. They send it off to Image Comics, and it was almost like destiny. They got a rejection. But these people will never take no as an answer. So they keep on working on Battle Pulp, and they self-publish it, which now it's like a big deal. Remember, this was before the internet. Robert had to read his books, and later they would actually be able to sell Battle Pulp. Would you expect Robert to be swimming in cash? This was actually more damaging to his bank. And if he is willing to put his life on the line to risk everything for comic books, you could tell he was passionate. He collects over $40,000 in debt. He even applies as an Amazon warehouse employee. But he walks out of the interview, and after one of his friends books an interview with Erik Larsen. And Robert asks, "Hey, can I do the interview?" His friend said, "Sure." And Robert now can talk to his hero. Robert and Erik hit it off. They talk for 2 hours straight. Now, Erik Larsen's phone number was something they had. Now they had a chance to pitch a comic book. And Robert and Cory work on this comic book. And they would end up selling one of the most revolutionary bits in media. Yeah, that's right, Science Dog. He ends up projecting it, but Erik sees something in them, so he ends up sending them to work on Super Patriot, but Cory doesn't want to work on Super Patriot, he just wants to work on Science Dog. So Robert Kirkman does the morally correct thing and ends up lying to his face, saying, No, they do want us to do Science Dog. They want us to do Super Patriot first. He said sure. Super Patriot doesn't even last a couple of issues. But Robert Kirkman doesn't care, and he begins pitching and pitching and pitching. But he ends up creating a comic book that would impact superhero comics forever. And that comic is about a kid named Mark your basic college student, whose dad's this great superhero named Omni-Man, but later realizes he has great powers and becomes the hero. Well, you already know, Duct Tape Man. At first, it starts out like a basic Marvel comic, which doesn't do too well sales-wise. But Robert has a twist planned on late in the comics. But Jim Valentino says, but why not just do it now? So they do the plot twist. Invincible is now in the public's eye, is selling like hotcakes, and his work on is impressive. It was so impressive that Robert Kirkman actually was the ability to be a part of indie comics or Image Comics properly. But he had to learn a dark secret about Todd, and that dark secret was Todd McFarlane doesn't wear any shoes! So when Robert was trying to listen to Todd discuss about his plans, all Robert could focus on was Todd's gross stompers. Anyway, Robert Kirkman became a member of Image Comics, and he made a manifesto, and that seemed to convince a lot of people. And not only that, he made The Walking Dead, which became one of the most widely accomplished, not only in the comic book industry, but the television industry as well. Let's talk about the elephant in the room. Indie comics now is more of a respected genre. If you search up a review for The Boys and compare to, like, say, an average MCU movie now, the quantity and the reviews are like night and day, which leads indie comics in both the comic world and the television world to surpass mainstream comics in terms of both reviews, but also in terms of content. Which ask me is why indie comics succeed and while mainstream are just fumbling the bag, because indie comics have to be original and new to survive the comic book industry. Mainstream comics is now just about kicking a dead horse as opposed to making a cool original ideas. So while indie comics are a hub for new ideas and community, the mainstream media has just become a dumping ground for dead characters and focusing on power scaling. Don't know what power scaling is? Good. Keep it that way. And all of this was due to a man just wanting to fix the comic book industry with his business partner.